my soul. Choose every little action. There's a reaction. Oh, can't you see what you've done for me? I'm happy inside all of the time. I tell you that when we bend a new corner, I feel like a sweepstake winner. When I meet you.
Now, live from the capital city, Georgetown. Political, legislative, economics, and current affairs. The People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, presents Nation Watch.
Good day, viewers. Welcome to this live edition of Nation Watch. Today, we are looking at the 55th anniversary of the People's National Congress Reform. With me in studio are two gentlemen who will help me look back to where we were, where we are, and where we're going. To my left is the leader of the People's National Congress Reform, retired Brigadier David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
And to his left, the chairman of our party, Mr. Basil Williams.
Thank you,
Welcome,
Cheryl.
sir.
Good morning, viewers.
As I said in the beginning, we are looking at our anniversary. Friday the 5th of October, an interesting date, makes the People's National Congress Reform 55 years old. Common leader, 55 years ago. Reminisce.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Well, first of all, we are not civil servants, and we're not about to be retired, and we're not going to work for a pension. And we are feeling very strong, very fit, and we are looking to the future. But 55 years ago, I think it's difficult for more than half of the population of Guyana to imagine what was happening then, because that was 1957. Guyana was still a colony. We were called British Guyana. And it was just about 2 years after our founder leader, Forbes Burnham, had broken from the People's Progressive Party. And he, along with Jaina Ryan Singh and Joseph Prayag Lachman Singh, who all three of them were, in fact, ministers in the 1953 People's Progressive Party Civic Administration. But because of the dogmatism of the People's Progressive Party, because of its rigidity, its doctrinaire rigidity, and its adherence to Soviet communism, these three founders broke away from the People's Progressive Party and established on 5th of October 1957, the People's National Congress. At the same time, on the same date, they founded something called the New Nation, which is our paper up to the present time, and I'd like our viewers to know that New Nation is in production as I speak. And they also established something called the People's National Congress Women's Auxiliary, and that was born on the very same day as the People's National Congress. What these three men intended was that there should be a party that was committed to human development, not to ideology, not to rigidity, not to Soviet communism, but a party that was committed to looking to see what the Guyanese people wanted, what the Guyanese people deserved, what the Guyanese people desired. And our party, the People's National Congress, has always been liberal. It has always been an inclusive party. As I said, we have been founded by one African and two Indian leaders. 2 years later, we amalgamated with the United Democratic Party, and other small parties eventually joined the People's National Congress. So we have always been an inclusive party, and as you know, in 1964, after the elections, we actually had a coalition. We coalesced with the United Force. So the People's National Congress has always been an inclusive party, and I think that is the hallmark of our historical origins, that we broke from the PPP because we wanted to create, I think, what could be called a social democratic party. It was based on working people, it was based on farmers, it was based on villages, it was based on democratic values, and it was an inclusive party. But in terms of ideology, if I can go forward, because in succeeding congresses, particularly one held, I think, in 1961 at Bedford-Acting, our founder leader, adumbrated certain policy guidelines, which eventually found themselves in something called the New Road in 1964, which was the name of our party's manifesto. And everything that had been adumbrated or promulgated in 1961, our party tried to implement in the years after it entered office in 1964. But another thing I was mentioned before I come off and give Basil a chance to speak is that in looking back at the time, the context within which our party was established in 1957, we must bear in mind that the colonial society in which we lived was nothing like what we have now. In fact, it's the People's National Congress which transformed our society, because there were some serious restrictions. Even at the time of independence in 1966, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Guyana was a foreigner. The Governor of the Bank of Guyana, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Guyana was foreigner. He was a Canadian, I think. The Governor of the Bank of Guyana was German. The Archbishop of the West Indies was British. The leading capitalist in Denver, the Bauxite Company, was foreign. And most of the key positions in society were held by foreigners. And even the Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force was a foreigner. The Commissioner of Police was a foreigner. So we came into independence as a sort of half-made state. We were still half colonial and half free. And this was a serious challenge. In addition to that, it was at this time that our neighbors tried to revive the territorial claims. Of course, we had problems with Suriname. They tried to claim the New River. We had problems with Venezuela. They tried to claim the whole Essequibo. So our party was founded on the basis of social democratic values, but it went into office in 1964 faced with very severe challenges. Let me just outline a few of those challenges, because when the PPP speaks about its record, it never speaks about what happened between 1957 and 1964. Those 7 years were 7 years of extreme difficulty for this country. And one of those problems was the economic problem. The British government had to have a commission of inquiry to investigate the finances of the PPP government. And when our party took over in 1964, the government was bankrupt. That is something that people don't know and they don't understand, and the PPP never speak about that. The other factor is that there was a tremendous unemployment problem. And in fact, our party had to get advice from the United Nations to set up something called the Guyana Youth Corps. In fact, that recommendation came from a United Nations consultant. And the whole purpose of the Guyana Youth Corps was to provide employment for young people, because the country that we inherited from the People's Progressive Party in 1964 was not only prostrate because of the difficulties, the catastrophe of what Shelly Jagan called the hurricane of protest, that the disturbances, as people know it, in 1964, but a lot of young people were unemployed. The schools were overcrowded. There were lots of dropouts, and our party had to rectify that problem. And when we look at our party's record, it is our party that built the campus for the University of Guyana Turkine. It's our party that built the Cyril Potter College of Education. It's our party that built the multilateral schools all over the country. It's our party that embarked on a self-help project that helped to build schools and roads and bridges. Our party introduced hinterland schools, because there were no hinterland schools for secondary schools for indigenous people prior to our parties getting into office, even though it came 7 years after the PPP. So our founder leader, Fowles Burnham, felt that to move the country forward, the first and the top priority had to be the development of people. He, in 1953, was the first PPP Minister of Education. And when he got into office in 1964, 11 years later, his top priority was in education. And he took decisions which, going on to 1976, resulted in Guyana having a free education system, university, from nursery right up to university. And when we speak of the past in the PNC now, as we celebrate our 55th anniversary, we look to the future. Because when you see what the PPP has done with the education system in Guyana today, there are dropouts. There's a dropout every hour of the day and night. Some boy or girl is dropping out of school somewhere in Guyana, primary or secondary school. When we look at the hinterland, where most of the indigenous people live, there are over 2,500 Amerindians in boarding schools throughout this country. Most of them are overcrowded. Most of them are short-staffed. Most of them don't have sufficient equipment and resources. Most of them have shortages of food. So we have to correct this situation. And we, the PNCR, look forward to, right now we are a government in waiting. We are going to go back into office, embraced by the Partnership for National Unity, and we are going to put focus on education. We're going to halt this massive dropout problem. We're going to give University of Guyana what it needs to give our children a quality tertiary education. We are going to provide sufficient schools in the hinterland for our Amerindian brothers and sisters, and we are going to make Guyana an education nation again. This is what our founder leader established 55 years ago when the PNC was established, and this is what we're going to do when we get back into office.
Common leader, thank you very much. Viewers, if you've just joined us and you want to know what is happening, it's the People's National Congress Reform's 55th anniversary, and we are looking back with the idea of looking forward to let you know what is happening. The leader just said we are a government in waiting, and as such, we are paving the way for our takeover. You know, it's quite interesting, common leader, in listening to you, that broad paintbrush that you just put on. There's so many people out there, especially the older ones, who are just rekindling, and they're remembering what has happened in those days. Education, very important. Employment, very important. Equality. Some people have to be reminded that after the chaos of 1964, as you called it, what Jagan called those riots, after that confusion, it was our founder leader who walked every village to reunite the races. And, people want to paint us as so many different types of people. But we were the ones who decided that, Guyana is for Guyanese. And there's no time for Indian and African to be fighting each other. Founder leader did that. And we are always saying, and we continue to say, that we have a place for each ethnic group. When it comes to religion, it was the Burnham administration that gave those religious holidays to everybody, because we came from a colonial system where we only had Easter and Christmas and with Sunday and those sort of things. And he said, no, it can't happen. We have different races. Now, I have said that, but Basil, what would you want to be reminded of?
Thank you, Cheryl. Well, I've always been impressed with the founder leader's approach to his working class nation. We are a working class party, and the overriding philosophy of the People's National Congress Reform has always been to guarantee to each and every Guyanese a decent standard of living. And that was Burnham's whole approach and the PNC's whole approach to governance during those years. And he empowered trade unions. During that period, most of those politicians came out of the trade union movement. And the trade union movement was united. It was a united trade union movement, and you would recall our national hero, Nathaniel Critchlow. He was a man whose aspirations really foreshadowed a lot of those policies too that Burnham had adopted in the People's National Congress reform. And so, for the present, where the trade union movement is in disarray, we as a party in government, we pledge that we would work with trade unions and continue to empower trade unions and enable trade unions to impact the unemployment situation in this country by being independent, organized, and free, and being able to give service to the workers, and therefore be able to bargain effectively and properly with employees in this country. So we look forward to the time when we are in government to implement some of those founding principles, especially with respect to employment in Guyana. Another thing that I would like to refer to is the question of the legality, this question of legality that was a hallmark of a People's National Congress government. You know, Fongoliva believed in things being proper and legal. It's not like what you have it today. The Fongoliva would never breach a law in this country. He would never breach a law. And that was the hallmark of the People's National Congress reform. We put legal institutions in place to guarantee democracy in this country. For example, under the PNC, the Office of the Ombudsman was introduced. Where is that functionary today? It's non-existent. That Ombudsman had a very important role to play in standing between the excesses of the state and the people of this country. But there's no Ombudsman today. We also, you know, the Public Service Appellate Tribunal was another important innovation introduced by the PNC government. And public servants really had the benefit of this appellate tribunal, which enabled their matters to be expedited. But for years, the government has not reconstituted the Public Service Appellate Tribunal. With the result that trade unions and workers with their grievances, they have to go into the general legal system. And you know what that system is. Matters take a decade or more to come up. Right now in the court, we're dealing with matters from 2001 and 1995 and those things. So it was visionary really to introduce the Public Service Appellate Tribunal to enable workers to have their grievances resolved. So there are many, you know, these are some of the things that the PNC government had introduced and which impacted good governance. You know, there was worker participation in government and in management. At almost every management table you had provision for an employee representation at the level. And so those things have disappeared. And this government really has rolled back the gains of those years. And it's for an APNU government where the PNC would be playing a very pivotal role to restore that position.
Thank you, Basil. Coming back to the new road and the Declaration of Sophia, those documents which sort of set out exactly what our program should have been and so forth. When the Burnham administration took government in 1964, one of the things that came to us full in our face was unemployment of young people. Comrade Leader, you mentioned that unemployment, and it was unemployment from the PPP administration then, and it's the same thing we're having now. The Youth Corps and the Guyana National Service created to take unemployed youths off the street to give them a future. Would you like to comment?
Well, the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration terminated the National Service in the year 2000. And it was a pity. Mrs. Jagan was always against the National Service. But I think people literally throw the baby with the bathwater. They didn't understand the reason for the National Service. And I think the animosity towards that organization was misplaced. As I said before, the PNC inherited a serious youth unemployment problem in the mid-1960s from the People's Progressive Party. PPP had no employment policy then, it has no employment policy now. And that is why the policy, the employment situation under the PPP in 2012 is almost the same as it was in 1964-65. Now, what we did was create an organization. It was not a military organization. It was an organization to train young people in skills so that they could become self-employed. And in fact, I must admit that it was patterned on the Israeli system, in which they would be encouraged, young people would be encouraged to settle in the hinterland after they graduated. Because of the number of unemployed young people, it was decided to enlarge that scheme into a national service scheme. But the idea was always one of employment. And by discontinuing the national service, we end up with a situation in which young people who have had problems in the formal education structure, system, have been unable to find work. Now, people like Captain Jerry Govaya, who runs a corporation called Roraima Airways, considers himself as a graduate of the National Service. Dr. Douglas Joseph is a graduate of the National Service. And there are thousands of Guyanese who are proud of this service. Now, if the National Service had problems, those problems could be fixed. But it is unreasonable, and in fact it is catastrophic, to remove that safety net, because right now, as I said, nearly 10,000 young people are still dropping out of school every year. Many of them drift into the hinterland looking for work, but many of them are unemployable simply because of the faults in the education system. So Burnham was trying to, one, correct the faults in the education system by establishing a proper teacher training college. Second, he was providing a safety net. Third, he was building multilateral schools. He was improving the University of Guyana. He's building secondary schools in the hinterland and throughout the country. But that whole educational concept has been lost, because what we see now is a large number of young people still dropping out of school, and there is no national service, there's no youth corps, there's no employment scheme which can provide them with the skills that they need to be self-employed. There are schemes in existence like the YEST. There's an outfit at Kurukuru, I think. But when those young people, you bring a girl from Maruka and you put her through a few weeks of training and she has this piece of paper, she goes back to Maruka, there's no employment for her. What we need is a proper education system so that young people coming out of the schools can go into national service, learn skills such as agriculture or construction skills, and they can have full lives. But let me come back, Cheryl, with your permission, to something else that Basil mentioned. That is the question of empowerment. What we see with the PPP now, which is different from the PNC then, and is different from what the PNC will do when it goes back into government as part of APNU, is the empowerment, the respect for workers. And there are two aspects I like to deal with here, the empowerment. One is what we see happening at places like Kokwani and Linden, in which there's gross disregard for the wishes of the ordinary villagers, the ordinary members. You have the Minister of Local Government and Regional Development going around the country uprooting elected neighborhood democratic councils and implanting, against the wishes of residents, implanting interim management committees. And that is why we've had this clash at places like Kokwani, at places like Letem, at places like Bartik, at places like Riverton. So our party was the party of empowerment. And when we get back into office, we are going to strengthen local government. In fact, Basil will describe in a minute or two the measures that we will take in the National Assembly to introduce reasonable changes to the local government bills, which will soon be brought before us. But the empowerment of the ordinary residents in their communities. Our party organized for years. We didn't even participate as a party in the last local government election, but I'll ask Basil to deal with that in greater detail. The other thing is collective labor agreements are sacred agreements between employers and employees, and we are going to restore the dignity of our workers. We are going to ensure that workers such as the Guyana Public Service Union sit down and negotiate with government. this idea of going right up to December and then somebody giving you 3.5%, which is very frequently lower than the rate of inflation. No negotiation, no discussions, and this is just given, and the result given to the working people. The result is that a lot of workers in this country, particularly in the state sector, are demoralized because the government, the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration, does not treat the people with respect. And that is a big problem in our labor relations. Our party sought to empower workers, and the PPP has systematically eroded the Trade Union Council. Trade Union Congress systematically eroded some of the largest unions and created a chaotic situation in the labor, among the working class, where their organizations, which are guaranteed under the Constitution, which every country in the Western Hemisphere recognizes, have been put in jeopardy. But I think that when you compare where we were prior to the PNC getting into office, prior to the birth of the PNC, where we are now under the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration, and where we're going under Partnership for National Unity, you will see that there are stark differences in the respect that our party, the People's National Congress, has for the ordinary working people. So I know Basil could take that.
Before Basil comes in, viewers, if you're joining us, we are celebrating 55 years of the People's National Congress reform, and the panel, as you see, comprised the leader of our party and the chairman of our party. Before you come in, Basil, I wanted to mention something that the leader said when he talked about the national service and settling of the interior. I mean, we have a vast interior, so much space. And when we had those little centers at the various locations, it was a case of having people there. It also helped us to man our borders, because we have extensive borders. And now we have nothing in the area. We don't have enough policemen on our borders. We don't have enough soldiers on our borders, and as such, it is left open for people to walk over. I think this is some of the things that we have to remember and to look at. Basil, local government, local democracy. I know we talked about decentralization of central government, and we had regional ministers, and in each region you sort of looked after your own business. I know you're the man for local democracy. What is your take on that?
Thank you, Cheryl. Just add to what the leader said. It's under the PNC that we have recognized the importance of decentralization. And the regional system was developed, and the local government system itself was there. And we nurtured that system. We nurtured that system, and we empowered. The whole idea was to empower the Guyanese people in the communities in which they live. And we recognize Ghana is a big place, and we recognize that centrally, the central government with a cabinet of a couple men or women in it, they couldn't really get into the governance of a village, say down in the Rupununi or down the Quarantine or even on the East Coast. And so that was left for the local government and regional system to bottom up, which really is anathema to what the PPP practices, which is democratic centralism. And what you see happening now is the epitome of democratic centralism, because the government has purported to revoke the power of the regional democratic council to supervise the neighborhood democratic councils. And that is not a small act. That's virtually turning the whole entire system of local governance on its head. And I don't know if they're serious about it, because they're saying it's an administrative act. But really, this whole thing it came with an ethos out of a recognition that people must be empowered in the communities in which they live. All over the world, there's decentralization. So really, it is a backward step to even think that you could run this country from Rob Street, as it were. And so we hope good sense prevail in any event. In any event, the government has been deterrent for the last decade or so in effecting the local government reforms. And these reforms, our principle governing these reforms are in our constitution. It's a constitutional requirement. But now that we have a parliament in which the government really is in the minority, and we have bills governing the local government reform that are now in the 10th parliament, we propose to deal adequately with these bills in a timely manner and try and get them up, because we recognize that we can't hold new local government elections in this old moribund system, and we need to have elections in a reform system. So we will want to, as a matter of priority, to pass those bills for the reform of the local government system. We'll have to do a lot of adjusting to what the PPP had put into Parliament, because even in this day and age, the government insists on, even though we have an inclusivity provision in the Constitution, they insist on having the president and ministers appoint an entire board almost, and he does so without consultation. But the lone person that they give to the leader of the opposition to appoint, he must do same consultation with other opposition parties. So it's really a masquerade, and we will have to rectify that in this when Parliament resumes, and we have another recourse to dealing with those bills which are now in our senior committee, the local government reform bills.
Thank you, Basil. 55 years ago, when we became the People's National Congress, our ideology had in its when it was being created, we looked at education, we look at employment, we look at equality, we look at economic empowerment, and we looked at local democracy. And all because we have the people of Guyana at heart. It was then, and it still remains, our underlying outlook. Current leader, the emphasis on the future. This country, this government of the People's National Congress reform, in collaboration with other members of the APNU, we are in waiting. What do we intend to push for the Guyanese people?
I think one of the most important criteria, or the most important elements in our philosophy, is our faith in our people, faith in ordinary people, ordinary citizens of whatever walk of life. And most important too is the concept of equality. Now, when our founder leader spoke about making the small man a real man, people thought it was a joke, and they didn't take him seriously. And we were built as an egalitarian party, and a lot of what he had in mind, a lot of what he did was to break down the barriers of prejudice and discrimination with which we grew. That's why I mentioned, the situation at the time of independence, when some of the key elements in our governmental system were still in the hands of foreigners. And in fact, even the Guyana police force, at the turn of the century, at mid-century, not the turn of the century, at mid-century, we still had a police force officer corps, which was almost there was not a single black face in it, because the expatriates dominated the police force. It dominated most of the government departments, as they were then called, and there were crises. For example, it was John Carter in what was then called the Legislative Council, who moved a motion supported by Roth, Walter Roth, I think it was, for Guyanization to start. And we had situations in which people were coming back from the Second World War, people like Victor Crane, Dusty Miller, people who had served in the Royal Air Force coming back. I think the story is told when Dusty Miller, he used to be a police sergeant. He went to the Attorney General, who at that time was European, and said, well, he's now, after the war, he did law studies and he would like to become a magistrate. The Attorney General said, you know what? You go to the quartermaster's store, pick up your uniform and get on duty. And what he did, he went into private practice and he ended up as the Chief Justice of Kenya. So what we inherited as the People's National Congress was an unequal society. And in fact, there was another famous case. In fact, the first big strike in the what was then the British Guiana Civil Service was because the Postmaster General was a foreigner. And after he retired, Mr. C.W.B. Dean, who you may know is the grandfather of Mr. Nigel Hughes, C.W.B. Dean was the next in line, and they had intended to bring another expatriate to become Postmaster General, and the civil service was about to go on strike, and the government just eventually appointed him, and they had a deputy as the expatriate. They did not feel confident in even having a Guyanese as Postmaster General. That is how bad society was in the 1950s and the 1960s. What I'm saying, therefore, is that the country the People's National Congress inherited, the country within which, the context within which the People's National Congress was born 55 years ago, was one that was really full of discrimination, full of ethnic prejudice, and very unequal. What our party had to do was build equality from the grassroots. There were places like the present National Park. It was a golf club, and it was closed to people with dark complexion. And the Georgetown Club was closed to people with dark. The Georgetown Cricket Club was closed to people with dark in complexion. Some of the banks were closed to people with dark. And it is because of the egalitarian policy of the People's National Congress that we started to see for the first time indigenous people in the National Assembly. We started to see for the first time indigenous police officers. We started to see for the first time people coming in, people of different complexions being allowed to fly aircraft, being allowed to take up positions in banks, being allowed to become bishops of the Catholic Church, bishop of the Anglican Church. These things never happened in colonial times, you know. So when we speak of the revolution, the cultural revolution People's National Congress brought about, I would say that egalitarianism, that the fact that every citizen could now be treated as equal, and the means of ensuring that equality was essentially education. The means of ensuring that equality was giving people equal access to education. And I think that was the triumph of the People's National Congress. You mentioned, Cheryl, in your opening remarks, the fact that prior to the PNC entering office, even though it entered office after 7 years of the PPP, the Wali, Eid al-Adha, Pagwa, which is now holy, and Yom Nabi were not recognized as national holidays. No. These were achieved by the People's National Congress because our founder leaders said that all religions must be on an equal footing. And we had two major Christian holidays, Easter and Christmas. We had two major Hindu holidays. We had two major Islamic holidays. And of course the other holidays are secular. But in looking at egalitarianism, for the first time, it was under the PNC. Even Dr. George Norton, who is our Shadow Minister of Health in APNU, reflects, I think every now and then PPP propaganda tries to show that the indigenous people never got educated. He said, well, how did I become a doctor? Because he became a doctor when the People's National Congress opened the doors to equal education to all Guyanese citizens and try to break down the barriers of exclusivity. So I would say as we look forward, the PNC will intensify that movement towards egalitarianism. And there's a national security dimension to it, because it is clear to us that when the police go into communities like Agriculture, when they go into communities like Buxton Friendship, when they go into communities like Okwani or Linden, the citizens there are not treated as if they had the right to enjoy certain fundamental liberties under the Constitution. In other words, they are treated as unequal. And I'd like Basil to make a comment on this because he has some experiences on the East Coast. And we have a catalog of people who lost that most essential, the most fundamental of all rights, the right to life. Because we have an administration, the People's Progressive Civic Administration, which does not respect that fundamental right. And we have to ensure that when we get into office, the damage that has been done by the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration will be corrected. Let me mention something else. Again, it's related to the field of national security. This question of trafficking in persons. Everybody knows that most of the victims are poor, indigenous girls. This is a serious matter in our country. And the government, the PPP Civic Administration, is not doing enough to protect those people. It's not just a matter of denial of fundamental rights, but it's a matter of unequal treatment for such a large section of our population. That the protection of the state has not been extended to those people. So we still have an unequal society. We still have a society in which young girls could be victims of a serious crime, the crime of trafficking, and the government just sweeps the crime under the table. We have senior people in society getting up and saying there's no problem. There is a problem. And 2 weeks ago, people in Bartica met, Red Thread, Red Cross, Women Miners Association, met and spoke about the problem. So the question of equality is not just about making the small man a real man. It's not about a slogan. It's a matter of how every department of government, every institution, the law courts, the police force, the whole judiciary, treat citizens. A citizen is a citizen. And you don't have different treatment for people in the coast and those from the hinterland. You don't have a different treatment for people of one ethnic group from another ethnic group. You don't have different treatment for people of one religious group and another religious group. We want to build, and we are going to build when we get into government, an APNU government. We are going to build a society in which every citizen feels assured that he or she has a place. A mother doesn't have to wonder. A mother from Agricola or Macdoom or Houston doesn't have to wonder what will happen to her son when he goes out to shop at night, when he's going to be arrested and taken to some police station. That is exactly what happened the last time the PPP had a Congress at Diamond. About 96 boys were arrested on the East Bank, taken to Brickdown police station on the 1st of August, Emancipation Day. Boys were singing in the lockups in Brickdown, "We want to be free," because the PPP police had arrested them because the PPP was going to have the Congress at Diamond School on the East Bank. And that, as far as I can see, is the hallmark of an unequal society. And what we're seeing now, in terms of the Commission of Inquiry, is that the police went into a certain community determined to treat Guyanese citizens as less than equal. Buzz, I don't know if you want to make a comment.
Go ahead, man.
Yes, I endorse all what you have said. Even when you were reflecting on the egalitarianism of the PNC, it reminded me that presently, that all that had been eroded over the last 20 years. In fact, I think it has been institutionalized. It's systemic and it's political. Because insofar as we have this government practicing that type of divide amongst the Guyanese people for political gains at election time, we will always have this unequal treatment. This unequal treatment had extended to an entire community, for example, in the community of Linden. They marginalized that community from the get-go of them being in power. And that's why now they're reaping what they have sown. Because you have a unified community which recognizes and accepts and knows that it was marginalized. And so the people are unafraid to act collectively. That's what happened with the Linden situation. And so when we talk, look, I know, for example, you talk about the agricultural situation. There was a situation also in Buxton where the police went into Buxton and they rounded up every male individual they saw that day and hoarded them into the police compound sports complex at Ivleary. When I went there, for example, a team of us, you saw how they have these people, you know, people lying down on the hard green hard floor, etc. Everyone who moved that day in Buxton, they had locked up and hoarded them into Ivleary. And what is the explanation they give? What explanation could they give you? People get up while going to work, and they pick them up and throw them in vehicles and took them down. So they have been stereotyping communities, and I believe that they're doing this to create this racial divide with a hope that it will sustain them in government. But they must take note from the last election that failed, and the PNC, APNU government will ensure that we move away from this kind of block unequal treatment. We have to do that. We must let this country know that no politician can, some person comes up, wakes up overnight and decides that he wants to be a politician or she wants to be a politician, and the first thing they do, they go and talk race. Black people are being discriminated against, or Indian people are being discriminated against. No, the people of this country must demand that they must work amongst them. They must work and service them, and they must raise issues in their interests, and not this thing about race, because we will never develop as a nation if we continue on this racial divide. So we must keep impressing on the Guyanese people, and that's why the People's National Congress Reform has been a party that has always included people. All of the Guyanese people have always been welcome under the branches of the People's National Congress.
I don't know if I can add before you go to your
Go
next
ahead.
question, because what Basil referred to was one of the most notorious events in the during what I call the troubles on the East Coast. It was during the tenure of office of Ms. Gail Teixeira, when she was Minister of Home Affairs, and it's called Operation Stiletto. If I'm not mistaken, it would have been in October 2005 or 2000. She had already taken over from Gadraj, and she had not yet handed over to Rohi. And it was about 144. This was incredible. About 104 people were just leaving, coming out of their homes to go to work, and they were just put in trucks and taken them to Ivleary. They were photographed, they were fingerprinted, they had their details. I think the police call it processed. They were processed and in Ivleary, and then I don't think a single one was charged.
No.
And when she was asked, or the explanation she gave to the news agency, why such a drastic measure was taken, she said, well, every country in the world documents its citizens, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's flippantly. And I do not think that the PPP realize how deep the wounds are, that there is no other community in this entire country which can arrest 144 of its citizens, innocent people, going to work, going to school, take them to police headquarters, photograph them, fingerprint them, document them, and then release them without apology. So when we talk about equality, when we talk about the commitment that the People's National Congress has, we are the only party to which poor, ordinary citizens could turn when they are discriminated against by the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration. We are the party of fundamental rights. We are the party of human rights. We are the party of law and order. We are the party that gives representation to people who have been victims of governmental oppression. So it's not just a matter of some constitutional requirement for fundamental rights. This is something that is happening in our country every day. The treatment of Amerindians, the treatment of poor people in villages, the treatment of even people with disabilities, the treatment of people, of a certain, of women, gender, because sometimes we have offenses, like domestic violence, and they're not properly investigated. We have, complaints against the police, and there is no machinery in the state which can assure the ordinary citizen that his or her rights will be protected. So I think the question of equality is one that I can give a complete and absolute guarantee that the next administration under Partnership for National Unity will remove will try to reverse the damage of discrimination that the PPP has inflicted on this country over the last 20 years.
In 1957, between 1957 and 1964, they created that society, that unequal society, which we inherited. And thanks to the People's National Congress, we were able to have a sense of nationhood, to be proud Guyanese. We had true education, because education was very important, and Burnham made certain that, we were able to do that. And even as we talk about education, the minister within the Ministry of Local Government, I recall saying to him one day, I don't understand how you say that, secondary school education only came to the hinterland during your time. When you became a teacher at Mabaruma Secondary School, was it during the PPP administration? He didn't answer me, just looked at me and he smiled. These are some of the things I don't understand how they could lie and lie so blatantly. And even as we were talking about, what we did in terms of education and so forth, I have to stick in that we were able to empower women. And we had so many women in non-traditional areas, and thanks to the People's National Congress, we were the ones to bring more women into administrative areas, into the parliament, into so many different things that we made certain that women were involved. We're looking at a time, and we are soon going to be out of it, and I'm sure you out there, viewers, would like to hear more of us. But we have activities that are coming around. We're celebrating our 55 years, as I said in the beginning. The date is October 5th, Friday, October 5th. Quite an interesting date, I must say. Some people talk about return to democracy. We started in 1955, 1957, on the 5th of October. And that morning, next Friday, we'll be having at Congress Place a flag raising ceremony. We'll have our anniversary exhibition and breakfast. You'll be hearing more of our program and so forth. But as we are coming down to the close of Basil, would you like to say a few closing words?
Yes, thank you. Listening to the leader and the discourse this morning, it becomes even more important when we take government that we must restore the rule of law in this country. The rule of law has been so seriously degraded under this government that there's absolutely, right now, no protection under the law. The protection under the law is not guaranteed as the Constitution provides. So that would have to be one of the highest priorities for an APNU government.
Current leader, your closing remarks.
Well, in closing, as I said, it's important for us to celebrate our 55th anniversary. But in looking back, let us understand the fundamental philosophy of our party, because this is what will inspire us as we move forward into the future. We feel that the party's work is not yet complete. We feel that some of the lessons, particularly the lessons of egalitarianism, of education, of empowerment, of employment, of ensuring that our country is safe and secure, our people are safe, are lessons that we take into the future. And we are working hard to ensure that together with our partners in the Partnership for National Unity, we will become the next government. Our people can be assured under the PNCR and on the APNU that they're going to have a good life, a much better life than they've had for the last 20 years under the PPP. That is our birthday promise to you.
Thank you, Common Leader. And even as we are celebrating our 55 years, we think in terms of those people who are not celebrating at this moment. I think this morning's paper talks about the 4 people who were killed in a fire yesterday. And then somewhere along in the news, I read that 2 cousins were stabbed to death in Linden. And then there were 2 women found dead in Berbice. We sympathize with all of those relatives who have to bear that sort of a situation at this time. Current leader and Basil, current leader and current chairman. So Brigadier retired David Granger and Basil Williams, thank you for being here with us so that we can tell our citizens out there, our viewers, that we are celebrating 55 years. 55 years is not an easy time, but we were there way back in 1957, and we will continue to be here. And under the People's National Congress reform and APNU government, we'll make certain that every citizen feels assured that he or she could have a better place. Thank you for being with us, and we hope to see you in the near future. God bless you.